do a quick screen recording on how you might go about using the SCORM integration, the Unity SCORM integration kit, using a WebGL Unity project to package it up and load it into an LMS. Now, I just want to show you this. I've just used one of the example projects from Unity3D. It's a puzzle creator kit. I'll just show you what it does here, so we can have a bit of a feel for where we might hook into the SCORM functions. We have an exit button which will exit this app, and we have something for the user to do and get scored on, which might get scored into the LMS. For instance, here using this activity, bit of a puzzle, let's just flick that up there, and we get a score at the end. Something out of a possible of 3 stars. So you might have 0, 33, 66, or 100% that might go back to the LMS. So the very first thing you need to do is to import the SCORM integration kit into your app here, into your project. So we go to Assets, Import Package, a custom package. Now I've got it on my desktop, so we just open that. Processes it, and we shall import it. And now you'll see a couple of extra things that have popped in. We have a SCORM folder with all of the, it's a bunch of stuff for an example SCORM application, but most importantly for us is the scripts folder, which contain the scripts needed to make the SCORM side of things work. We have a plugins folder with a SCORM JavaScript library that the WebGL application uses to communicate back out to the enclosing, I guess, web page. And we have a WebGL template, which is the template we will use because what it does is have a couple of JavaScript inclusions to help talk to the LMS. So basically, let me go to my little documentation here. So this is basically how it will work. You have your web player or your WebGL web page that gets produced when you export your Unity 3D project as a WebGL target. What happens is it creates a web page with an embedded WebGL app. Now, using the LMS, when you load it as a SCORM object, speaks to the SCORM JavaScript file that I showed you in the WebGL template. Now that uses this SCORM JavaScript library I showed you in the plugins folder to communicate between the enclosing web page and your Unity 3D exported project. And it uses a couple of important files. We have at the lower level the SCORM API wrapper. That's the bit that really speaks between Unity 3D, your app, and the enclosing web page when you've exported it. Now we have a file called a SCORM Manager, and that really sort of abstracts or makes it much easier to use some of these functions. So you call just a handful of functions to be able to communicate back to the LMS via SCORM, and your controller some code that you use to call these functions. So you've got, and we'll have a look at in that example project how you might create a little controller that some of your existing code could hook into, for instance, when I get 2 out of 3 stars, it will call a SCORM Manager function, which will interact all the way back up to LMS to store a score for a part of it. So one of the first things I need to do also to enable SCORM to work on this main menu here is I need to click on the SCORM and create a SCORM Manager. So it says remember to place objects that need messages from the SCORM Manager under it in the scene hierarchy. Okay, for instance, so that's our controller code that I was talking about. So we create the SCORM Manager. I've actually created a controller that I want to speak to SCORM. So I've created there. I'm going to drag that under the SCORM Manager. So you have the SCORM Manager, which has the SCORM Manager script, and your controller sits under it because, for instance, one of the things is when I've created a SCORM object out of all of this, there is a function, so once it finishes loading and it's talked to and registered with the LMS, it will send a little I am ready message to anything under it, and my controller will know about it if it's sitting underneath it like that. So one of the things in this one here is the menu canvas has a scene menu script. So let's just jump across to here. So we have a scene menu script and my SCORM controller, where this is the bit I'm going to create a new little script that will talk between my existing code and SCORM. So for instance, I might have a function that handles an exit to save all of the stuff to the LMS, and I might have a function save score, and let's just leave it as a parameterless empty function for now. Now in the scene menu, so remember when let's go back to Unity. So when I click exit, it's calling my controller, my SCORM controller, the DoExit function over here. So SCORM controller, it's calling this here. So we want to be doing something there when we click DoExit, and I'll just find some example code to put in here for you. So for instance, for example, if we're exiting our SCORM object, we need to do a few, and this is all documented, but the important bits are we need to call the SCORM Manager. Okay, what I've done is just load the SCORM Manager script here in the background. So the first thing when you're exiting a SCORM object is you want to call the SCORM Manager. There's a function set completion status, and we want to set it as a particular thing here, student record. Oops, let's get that up again. Student record, completion status type. We want to set it as a completed, especially I'm thinking about the Blackboard LMS. When you set the completion status as completed, it saves it as a completed attempt in the grade center. So we want to do that. We want to say, okay, set this attempt as completed. We have to do another call here to the SCORM Manager, set exit, and we want to set the exit as, we use the student record to do some things here, and we're going to do a normal exit. It's as if we just click the exit button, so it's a normal exit. And then the last thing we want to do is use the SCORM Manager, and we call a function called commit. So these three, what basically it does is it says this, when the user clicks the exit button, we're going to set the completion status as completed. Okay, great. So the LMS knows we've finished. There's an exit type of normal, and when we click commit, it takes these two and actually sends it to the LMS. What happens is once that's been safely stored, the LMS will reply back and say, okay, you've successfully done that. So we need to respond to that message coming back, and so we need a public function called SCORM commit complete. This is the one that responds to when we call a commit to the LMS. It says, okay, everything's finished. And in this one here, we want to put a single function called SCORM Manager terminate. This means all of my my information that I wanted stored into the LMS has been successfully stored, and it's come back, and clicking the terminate basically ends the SCORM session with the LMS. So when I click exit, this is enough information for us to communicate back to the LMS. Now if you remember, the exit button is calling the DoExit function. Here you can see in the right hand corner of the screen. Let's jump back across. The DoExit will do this backwards and forwards to the LMS. Okay, so that handles how we might do that exit function in this one here. So let's just save that scene. And what we want to do is we want to open up another scene, the first level, the one that we ran there. And because we also want to, this one's a 3D scene, so let's just zoom in. If you remember, this is what the scene looks like. Basically, we want to hook into the end part where it speaks back, where it displays those 1 or 2 or 3 stars and do a bit of a score back to the LMS, for instance. But because we're doing it here, we need to create that SCORM manager here. We have the SCORM manager. We need to, this is what I like to do, I like to create an empty game object and call it something like controller. And I've got a script, it's my SCORM controller script, so I'll drag and drop it. If you remember, I'll swap back to the editor. The SCORM controller script, where all my, in between my existing code and the SCORM manager will occur. So as you can see, I've got the SCORM controller here, and I want to put that under the SCORM manager. Now I've got enough here ready to speak back to the SCORM script. Okay, so in the actual level here, we have a script that's attached to the completion UI called the scene completion script. So let's go back to the editor and have a look at that. So here we have a part where it gives us how many earned stars, and we want to give, we want to do the SCORM logic here. Okay, so what we might want to do is save a final score, and to do that we need to set a couple of things. We need to set a minimum score, a maximum score, a raw score, and a scaled score that sends it all to the LMS. So for instance, let's go back to our SCORM controller, and we had a one here called save the score. So we need 3 things. We need a score minimum, and these are all floats. We need a score maximum, and we need another one, score raw. And what we can do is obviously calculate the scaled score, the raw, out of the max. Okay, so what we want to do here is we need to set something. So once we get the minimum, we need to store that to the SCORM controller. So SCORM manager set score min, and we just want to pass that score min that came through from the calling function. So when somewhere in our existing code, we'll call save score and send these 3. So when we get the minimum, we'll send that through. SCORM manager, let's set the score max. So let's save that score max. And we also want to set the score raw score, which is whatever that one is, score raw that we've come through. Now we want to calculate what that scaled score is, so let's just create a local variable called score scaled, and which is obviously going to be the raw score divided by the score maximum. And once we've calculated that, we want to save that. SCORM Manager, set the score scaled. Score scaled. So from here, what we've done is we've created a function in our own controller code that we can call save score and save some things there. This is like an overall score for the entire LMS thing. So we'd give it a minimum and a maximum, and what the raw is. We'd calculate what that. For instance, if we've got 3 levels, 3 stars, 3, 6, 9. Minimum would be 0, maximum would be 9, and say we got 6 out of 9, it would calculate what that percentage is and send that all through. So that's one of our prerequisites there. Another function we really wanted to save is, and I've seen it used in a few things, but in this one we don't want just an overall score, but we also want to save each level score. And so we use a part of the SCORM standard called student interactions. So let's create a new one, and we'll call this one save. Let's just call it a save interaction. And this one we do need a few things come through. We need a string description to describe what this interaction is. Optionally, we can have a student response. So let's call it student response. But we might use that to save what the number of stars they had for level. So let's just change that to stars for this one here, and we can have whether this particular thing was correct or incorrect for this one. So this one's great for doing things like a quiz question, where we might have the description used as the question that was with the quiz. So select the lowest value of X. This would be what the student actually selected, and this one would be, is it correct or not correct? So let's do that one there. Now we want to do a few things here. There is a class in the SCORM integration kit called the student record, and it has a subclass called a learner interaction record. So we want to grab a hold of one of those. So student record, the learner interaction record is a type. So we want to create a new object called maybe a new interaction that we want to store to the LMS, and we want to create a new version of this student record, learner interaction record. I'm not going into too detail on what this all means. It's in the documentation, but this one here creates a new object, new interaction, which is of the type student record, learner interaction record. And this helps us just use object-oriented programming to create enough information to send all the correct information that needs to be sent to the LMS to store this into the LMS. So the first thing we need to do is we need a new interaction, and it needs to have an ID. That's absolutely there. So there's a little handy function that you can call, because the ID has to be unique. And so I've got a little handy function in the SCORM Manager called get next interaction ID, and what it does, it says, excuse me LMS, what's the current interaction ID, and it will increment that by a number of 1. So we've always got something useful there. We do need a timestamp. Okay, because we need a timestamp, we have system we need to use. We need to have a using system function there. Okay, so we want to use the timestamp. So our new interaction object, and what is the timestamp of this particular interaction? Date, time, now. Okay, that's a nice way of grabbing the date timestamp for that. Okay, new interaction. We need to have a type. And let's use student record interaction type. So there's a number of interactions. A choice, which is like a multiple choice, a fill in the blank, a like it, a long fill in, matching, not set, numeric, other, performance, sequencing. So I'm just going to keep it as a choice because although it doesn't fit terribly well with where we're using it in this example project, it's the most understandable for a multiple choice question. So let's choose that one there. We can set a weighting, but let's set in the new interaction the student response. What did the student actually give us? And so this one here, I'm actually going to use it as the stars. That's where I'm going to store it. But that would typically be in a multiple choice question. What did the student select? So let's store that bit there. You can, I'll show you this one, the new interaction. The latency is how many seconds they took to perform this particular interaction. And we could, from this sim, we've got a timer there. We could pass through the seconds, and 6.2 seconds as a float. However, I'm going to leave that off for keeping it simple. We do need to put in a description. And this one is getting handed in from the calling function. So let's put that in, description. Now, this is how I liked to do this, did they get it correct or incorrect? First of all, student record result type, result, and we'll make that student record, we'll set it to incorrect as a default. Then we'll do some processing here, and because we're gonna get passed through a Boolean value from the calling function, we can use that. So we say if is correct. So did we say it was the student's result was correct? Then we can say, okay, actually let's change the result from incorrect to correct. And we'll use that student record result type, and we'll change that to correct. Great. Now you can see we've set up a function that we can call from our own code where we've already built the WebGL interaction. We've used the student record learner interaction record, created a new blank object. We've set some of the things we really need to do. We need an ID, we need a timestamp, we need a type. Because it's a choice, we do need a response, and we always need a description. We've used some passed in a Boolean to determine whether it was an incorrect or a correct response. And the final thing is obviously we want to set it ready to get stored to the LMS. So we want to add an interaction, and we'll pass that one the new interaction object we have used. Okay, function, just briefly, function call here. We create the student record, set all the parameters there, and then we say to the SCORM manager, add this interaction to your interaction list. So what happens is, while your Unity 3D simulation game, quiz, whatever is running, you'll have a number of times where you will call the SCORM manager and add an interaction or add the score. It basically sets it to a list ready to be pushed to the LMS when you exit. So this sort of puts it into a cache. We could call this a couple of times. We'll get a few interactions in the cache. We might set the score, and we might set these two things here. Only when we send the SCORM manager the commit command, does all of that actually get pushed through to the LMS? And what happens is when we exit, we set that through to commit, and we wait for the terminate to completely shut down our own thing happening there. So we've got an interaction ready. So remember here, when the level gets complete, we get assigned a few stars. So SCORM logic here. Okay, so what we might do is save an interaction at that. So let's call our SCORM controller, save let me just push pause for a moment. That's right, what we need to do first in this particular one, because this doesn't know about, this is not a static class, this is actually a script attached to an object in the scene. So we need to, let's just save that, we need to let the scene completion script know about the SCORM controller. So what we're going to do, there's many ways to do it, and this is just one way to get you up and running really quick, is we have a SCORM controller, which is that that script class there. Well, we want an actual instance of it, so let's call it SCORM controller, and the instance we'll call it SCORM controller script. So that gives us a place to have a pointer to the SCORM controller object. But now we need to, when this scene completion menu item loads up, we need it to know about it. So let's open up a standard start function, which gets kicked off when the scene loads up and this object gets created. So SCORM controller script, we want that to be assigned. We want it to be assigned, let's go back to it, we want it to be assigned this controller here. So what we can do is, we could have set this up as a public variable and just dragged it and dropped it. So actually let's do it that way. I'll show you this one quickly. What you would do is you could use the game object, actually I won't show it here, we could use the game object find function, and actually I'll copy and paste it from my example stuff here. So you create a new game object, you would find the game object called controller in the scene, so it would find this, and then the next line would say actually assign the script, SCORM controller script, to that object. So we won't do it this way, we'll make it easy on ourselves. We'll make this a public variable, SCORM controller script, and when we go to the completion UI, there should be a new little just clear that. Scene completion, save it, come across. Once it's recognized it, we will have a new part in this here where we can drag and drop the controller straight to it. I'll just push pause while it finishes processing. Okay, actually, I've decided to leave it at this one here because I've got all my example code working quite well there. So what we've done here is create something there. Let's actually just make it public just for this particular example here. SCORM controller script is now pointing to our SCORM controller object in the scene. Now, let's just find, there we go. Okay, so when we complete the level, we're going to have an interaction to save. So let's call that SCORM Controller script, save interaction. We need a description, so this is the level, so we could find it programmatically, but just for this one we're just going to call it level 1. Stars, how many stars did we get? Well, we've got it there, earned stars. So earned stars, but we want to pass it as a string, so we'll pass it as a string there. Go back, say auto formatting. So earned stars we get assigned here. It determines what we're getting, and so we're going to just pass it in, but our function's looking at it as a string, so we had to say to string. Okay. Is it correct? Well, this is where if we're using it as a quiz, we'd determine whether it's correct or not. We're just going to say it was correct just for this example. So every time that we hit the end of scene, it's going to call that function in our own personal controller here, and it's going to store that all into the into SCORM, into the LMS. Okay, let's just make sure everything's saved there. Now the scene menu's got something similar, so that's the one there. When we finish it, we score it back. So let's just jump back to our other scene, the main menu, and we want to do something here. So we want to make sure that when it comes back here, it's let's just show you. We'll click play. What happens is it loads how many stars. So here you can see it's a possible out of 3, 6, 9 stars, and I've earned 3. So that's the sort of thing we want to send back to the LMS, 3 out of 9 stars. And that's actually in the scene menu. Total earned stars, I've got this here just to check out what's happening. I did a little debug log. So, oh yeah, I've got 3 out of 9 stars, okay. So this is where we might want to put that back into the SCORM object. So we do, I'll do a little note, SCORM here. Okay, if you remember, in the scene we've got the SCORM manager with our controller, which has the SCORM controller script, but our menu script doesn't know about our controller script unless we tell it. The same way we did it in the scene completion. Scroll to the top. We need to grab that. SCORM controller script. When we have a start function, is there one already here? Yes, we have a start, so we'll hook into that. Down the bottom, we'll tell it how to find it using my little bit of code here, so that we've got a reference to our SCORM controller. There's a couple of ways to do it. For this one, we'll do it here. And okay, here's our SCORM. So this is where we want to save the score. If you remember, we created a save score function that needed the min, max, and the raw, and it would do the rest for us. So we do a little call here, SCORM controller script dot save score. We need the minimum score, which is a 0 float. Okay, our maximum score, we know it's 9, so we'll put that in 9. And what is our raw score? It's our total earned scores as a float. So we've got it as an int, so total earned stars, and to change it, I'm doing this live and I can't quite remember, but I think it's something like float.pass. Yes, and we can put in an int, I believe. Let's just have a look at the documentation here. String. Okay, so let's just, this is a bit dodgy, so you might not want to do this at home, but we're going to change the int to a string and then pass it as a float, so we can pass the correct thing through. So this one line is our controller here, and it processes it all, sends it to the SCORM manager, and ready to go. So let's look. So we have, in summary, we have put in, we've taken our base WebGL web project. We imported the SCORM integration kit. We've used in each scene that needs to speak to this to SCORM, we need to add a SCORM manager, which just creates this particular game object, which has just got the SCORM manager script in. So it puts the SCORM manager script into your scene. Now what we need to do is we need to create an extra bit of code on our end that basically acts as the middleman between our existing code and SCORM. And this one, I like to call it controller or main controller or something like that. You create an empty, right click, create an empty game object, and I've got, and you just drag and drop your script that you're using as the controller. I called it a SCORM controller because it made sense to me. So this is my extra bit of functionality that interacts between my existing Unity 3D code and the SCORM manager. This is something I have to write myself. I don't touch the SCORM manager code, I just touch this bit here. And this is where we create as many in-between functions. As a minimum, you probably want to have your DoExit. When the exit button is clicked, those three things get set. You need this one here to respond to the message back from the SCORM manager once the LMS has saved it, when we need to call that one there. And in this one here, I'm storing two extra things. I'm storing interactions at the end of every level, end of every quiz question, is another way you might use this bit here. And we want to save a final score. Remember that every time these SCORM manager add interaction, SCORM manager set the scaled score, it basically sets it to a cache that only gets written to the LMS when I call this commit function as a final, I've finished now. And what we've also done then in my existing code that you would have sitting there, I have used one method to make sure that my existing scripts know about my SCORM controller script, and I've chosen to do it this way, which is a reference to the script attached to that controller. As you can see here, this is the scene menu script. Scene menu script, and SCORM controller, when it starts up, it finds the controller game object, which is this one here. And this little bit here says actually just get the SCORM controller script, which is attached to that object, and assign it to this object. So now anywhere else I can, excuse me, I can call it. In this instance, when the main menu opens, it calculates how many stars I've scored. And so that's where we've hooked into the SCORM. It says minimum, maximum, what are my total earned stars, and it will send it across to here. The logic that I've got here creates and this is what you need to do for the LMS. You need to give it a min, you need to give it a max, you need to give it the raw score, and you need to give it that scaled score, which is often just the raw score divided by the max. And once you've saved those four, the LMS will know about your final score. But let's just recap what we did in the other scene there, which is, each level. And I have to find out where these scenes are again. Here, example. We did the same thing in this level because this level needs to know about SCORM because we want to save an individual record to LMS for each level. So we needed to create that SCORM manager again. Remember, we could click SCORM, create SCORM manager. I created an empty object and assigned my SCORM controller and put it as a child of the SCORM manager so that these two can talk nicely together. And then we looked into the scene completion. The same sort of thing. We needed we needed the scene completion script to know about my controller, and we did that again. On the startup we say find the controller object, find the script that's attached, and make that. local variable or the class variable equal to that. And so then when it came time to the level is complete, the SCORM Controller script saves an interaction. We need a description. We needed to have something that was what the student produced, and as an example, we said, okay, that we'll pretend this is a quiz question that got answered correctly. Now you can interested to see here when the level was completed, we have a time. So what we could do is, remember I said there's a latency option. So what we can do is create a new little parameter there, time taken. New interaction object. Latency is the setting there, and that's looking for a float, which is handy because time taken is a float. And back at our calling function here, the level does have a time taken to complete it, and we can add that as a parameter that can be passed through to the LMS. So now, in addition to it knowing that it's level 1 and how many stars I earned, it also knows how long I took on this level. So that's quite a nice way of reporting. And so what you need to do is this is all ready to go. So I've got this built as an object. So let's go to our build settings. So it needs to be a WebGL. Go to your player settings. Now, because if you see on the side here, we've got a WebGL template with SCORM stuff that's been put in. When you go to your player settings here, player, and you look for the excuse me, the resolution and presentation, there's a new template called SCORM. So that's basically the same as the default template, but includes the JavaScript libraries that are needed to speak to your LMS, and also an optional way of simulating it. So we make sure we select that, and then you click build. So I like to build mine under a separate one. Let's call this example. Save. And example, save. Aha. Oh, good grief. You can see I shouldn't have done this live, so let's just close this here. There's a couple of issues going on. That's fine. Time. True. Oh, it's because I forgot to save it. There we go. Let's clear the project. And so there's no more errors, so we should be able to build that now. Let's go back to our build settings, build, example, save, and it will go through and build it. So let's just, for the sake of the screen recording, let it start it. So it's going to start building. I'm going to push pause now while we wait for this to do its thing. Okay, so I actually stopped the compile process of this to short circuit this piece. So when you publish it to SCORM, you get something like this: an index HTML file, template data, which is a whole bunch of stuff there, plus our 2 extra files. This one's the important one, the SCORM JavaScript, and this is where your actual application sits. So this will load in a web page now on your server, but it won't. It's not SCORM. It's not a SCORM package yet. What has to happen is it needs to be wrapped with a bunch of XML files and extra data. So let's just move that aside for now. And again, you can use the SCORM kit here to export your SCORM package. So you need to export this as a web player first. In this instance, you need to do it as a WebGL. So once we've done that, a couple of steps. Choose the folder where you've exported your application to. So I've got my build in this one here. Actually, it's this one here. Okay, there we go. That's one where I've exported before, so I'll choose that. Application name, you can call it whatever we like. Identifier, SCORM Sim 2019 version 1. There we go. Title, we call this Physics Sim and Quiz. For example, that's what it might have been. We might have had some quiz questions there. Description, it can be anything you like. I'm just going to have the same thing. I'm going to call it the same thing just for this one here. Now when I click publish, it's going to ask me for a file name. I'm just going to take the spaces out because that's what I do as a programmer. Click save and it's published. Now you can see here that is a SCORM package ready to be uploaded into LMS. So it's basically taken these 3 files and wrapped it up in all the files and format that you need to successfully load it into SCORM. And I'll show you what that looks like. I'll just unzip that. So it's actually the zip file you load into the LMS. But this is what you can see. You can see the build, you can see the index, and you can see the template data. But you can see there's all this other files that you need to basically be able to talk back to the LMS to understand that this is a SCORM file. One of them there should be a manifest file. Let's see if we can find it. There, IMS manifest. I'll show you what that looks like in our code editor. Let's let that load. A bunch of stuff there. You can see here's the identifier we gave it. You can see here's the name, a whole bunch of different stuff. We didn't set any of this stuff, but we need to let the LMS know that we didn't set it and there is no time limit. And here are the references to the files that are part of that particular content. So that's why the integration kit allows you to do the code side of things, but it also allows you to package your exported files as a SCORM compliant project, which is this file here, and that's the file that needs to get uploaded. So that's the real quick and dirty tutorial on how to get it all up and running. I hope that helps you. Please, if didn't go into how to actually really integrate it in any depth, the documentation will show you how to do that much better than this video will. Hopefully I can do some more videos later that will help dive deeply into how do you do that. But that's it for now. Thanks, guys.